The room is silent. A man stands at a blackboard in Fine Hall, Princeton. He is not a professor. He is not a student. No one is quite sure what he is. He writes numbers, symbols, dates that don't line up with anything. Students who pass him call him the Phantom. They don't know his name is already on some of the most important mathematics of the century. They don't know that 20 years earlier, at 21 years old, he beat John von Neumann's own theorem at its own game. They just see a ghost talking to a blackboard that doesn't talk back. This is what a Nobel Prize looks like, 20 years before anyone gives it to you. This is John Nash. Most of history tells you what he built. We're going to tell you what it cost him.
Welcome to Dark Science Mind.
Bluefield, West Virginia. 1928. Coal country, mountains on every side. The kind of town where nobody expects a genius to come from. His father was an electrical engineer. Steady work, steady man. His mother had been a school teacher before she married, and she never really stopped teaching. Not with her own son. Here's what people get wrong first. Nash wasn't the golden child prodigy you're picturing. Not the one who's top of every class, hand up first, teacher's favorite. He was something stranger. He read constantly, alone. He played chess against himself for hours, working out lines nobody had asked him to work out. He whistled, not pop songs, not what the other kids hummed. Entire Bach compositions, start to finish, from memory. A kid who lived mostly in his own head. Not because he was shy, because his own head was more interesting than anywhere else available to him. His parents noticed. They didn't try to fix it. They fed it. Private math lessons, university courses arranged before he'd even finished high school. By the time he left for college, the shape of the rest of his life was already visible if you knew how to look. Nobody around him yet did. Invention. Princeton, 1948 to 1950. Nash arrives as a second-year graduate student and does something almost insolent for someone that young. Game theory at the time belonged to John von Neumann. Von Neumann had built the foundations, but only for a narrow kind of situation. Zero-sum games, where one side's win is exactly the other side's loss. Poker, war, chess. Nash looked at that and thought, most of life isn't zero-sum. Business isn't. Politics isn't. Negotiation isn't. Most conflict in the real world involves people who can both end up better off, or both end up worse off, depending on what they choose. Von Neumann's math didn't reach there. So at 21 years old, Nash built math that did. His doctoral thesis, 27 pages, barely long enough to be called a book, proved something almost unreasonably elegant. In any competitive situation, no matter how many players, no matter how complicated, there exists at least one point where every single player is doing the best they possibly can, given what everyone else is doing. Nobody can unilaterally do better by changing their own move. Everyone is stuck, not because anyone is losing, but because nobody can win any harder without somebody else moving first. That point has a name now, the Nash equilibrium. It sounds abstract. It is anything but. It's why two gas stations on opposite corners charge almost the same price. It's why nuclear powers built weapons neither one wanted to use. It's why species evolve strategies that look, from the outside, like agreements nobody actually signed. A 27-page paper, written by a graduate student barely out of his teens, quietly rewired economics, biology, and political science for the next 70 years. He would not be recognized for it in any meaningful way for over 4 decades. By the time the world caught up to what he'd done, he would barely be the same man who did it. Psychology. Here is where the story the movie told you starts to diverge from the one that actually happened. Nash is a consultant at the Rand Corporation, working on Cold War game theory. Real strategy, real stakes, the kind of work that made him valuable to people who valued almost nothing outside of results. That year, he's arrested in a police sting operation in Santa Monica, one specifically designed to entrap gay men in a public restroom. Rand drops him immediately. A Beautiful Mind never mentions this, not the arrest, not the dismissal, not what it says about how thin the ground was under even a mind like his, the moment his life didn't fit the story people wanted to tell about him. He rebuilds, moves to MIT, marries Alicia Larde, a physics graduate he met there in 1957. 2 years later, everything breaks. April 1959. Alicia is pregnant with their second son, and John Nash, the man who outthought von Neumann, the man colleagues called the only real genius they'd ever met, starts to unravel. Paranoia, delusions. He resigns from MIT. He is hospitalized, the first of the many admissions that will follow across the next 3 decades. Listen to how he described it himself, years later in his own words, in the autobiography he wrote for the Nobel Committee. He called it a shift from what he called scientific rationality into the kind of thinking that gets you diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. He said he wouldn't go into the details, too personal, too much to relive on paper. Alicia divorced him in 1963. The illness had simply become too much to hold. But in 1970, after his final hospital discharge, she took him back into her home anyway. Not as his wife, not yet again. Just as someone who still couldn't let him disappear entirely. They wouldn't remarry until 2001. Between those two dates sit almost 30 years. Most biographies compress into a single sentence. He struggled with mental illness. 30 years is not a sentence. 30 years is most of a life. Neurological study. So what was actually happening inside his mind? Paranoid schizophrenia doesn't work the way pop culture usually shows it. It isn't a switch. It's a slow distortion of the same machinery that in Nash had produced genuinely original mathematics, pattern recognition pushed past any normal limit, a mind built to find connections other people missed entirely. In schizophrenia, that same pattern finding turns against reality itself. The brain starts detecting meaning and threat in places where none exists. A dysregulation in dopamine signaling. A breakdown in how the prefrontal cortex filters and checks what the rest of the brain is producing. The very circuitry that let him see an equilibrium no one else could see is not, neurologically, a separate system from the one that convinced him foreign agents were communicating with him through the newspaper. There's a real research finding worth sitting with here. A large study by psychiatric geneticist Kenneth Kendler found that higher IQ is generally linked to lower risk of developing schizophrenia. And the researchers pointed to Nash by name as the most famous exception on record. High intelligence is protective on average. It was not, for him, a shield. And here's the part worth correcting directly, because a lot of retellings get this wrong too. The idea that Nash simply willed himself better. In his own account, he described making a conscious decision to reject his delusional thinking and return to rationality. It's a powerful line. It is also not really how psychiatrists believe schizophrenia remission works. Nash himself admitted that even after periods of clarity, he slid back into delusional thinking again, later in the 1960s. Recovery, when it happened for him, looks less like a single act of will and more like a long, uneven drift, helped by aging, by reduced stress, by the mere passage of enough time for symptoms in some patients to soften. Not a switch he flipped. A tide that slowly, unevenly went back out. The end. In 1994, the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, shared with John Harsanyi and Reinhard Selten, for work Nash had finished 44 years earlier, before he'd even turned 23. 44 years between the proof and the recognition. 44 years in which his idea had already quietly become load-bearing in economics, biology, and political theory, while the man who built it was, for long stretches, unable to hold a job. In 2015, one more prize arrives, the Abel Prize, for work in partial differential equations, shared with Louis Nirenberg, the same Nirenberg who once called him the only true genius he'd ever met. Nash is 86 years old. Alicia is at his side, as she has been on and off for almost 60 years. They fly home from the ceremony in Norway. A taxi picks them up at the airport on the New Jersey Turnpike, headed home to Princeton. The driver loses control trying to pass another car. The taxi hits a guardrail, then another vehicle. Neither John nor Alicia is wearing a seatbelt. Both are killed instantly. 4 days after receiving one of the highest honors mathematics has to offer, the man who spent 30 years fighting to be believed, by his colleagues, by his doctors, sometimes by his own mind, was gone. No third act, no lesson waiting at the end to make it easier. Just a mind that saw further than almost anyone else alive, carried by a man who spent half his life fighting to convince the world, and sometimes himself, that what he was seeing was real.